A lot of you joining today or watching on demand are new to Wyebot, haven't been exposed as much to what we do. So I'm just going to give a quick 1-minute introduction to who Wyebot is, and then hand it off to our engineers to kick off the presentation. Um, so Wyebot. So Wi-Fi issues are interesting. They're an interesting thing to approach, and some difficulties that we've noticed are the intermittent issues are difficult to catch or replicate. On-site troubleshooting visits cost time and money, and oftentimes Wi-Fi is blamed even when it's not the culprit. But the disconnect is that oftentimes the infrastructure side monitoring doesn't show us what we need to know to be able to troubleshoot these things or address these things. Hence the Wyebot solution. So Wyebot is a client-side perspective, user-side perspective of the Wi-Fi experience. And the way that we do this is by deploying DEX sensors and DEX agents on premises, on laptops to gather the Wi-Fi experience from the user perspective. That feeds into our AI engine, and the data is surfaced on our centralized and intelligence dashboard. This gives not just good data, but also good recommendations, automated recommendations on problems that are happening and how to fix those things, helping make it easier for IT teams to address what's most pressing, what needs to be fixed, most times before users even notice any impact to their Wi-Fi experience. So if you have any questions about Wyebot, reach out to us afterwards. Happy to talk more about it. But without further ado, want to introduce Jacob and Adam from our sales engineering team, who will be diving into the Grafana and Wyebot demo. So Jacob, do you want to take it away?
All right, yeah, great. Thanks, Mike, for that introduction. And yeah, so super excited for this presentation, and I'm glad so many of you were able to join here today. But yeah, so we're going to talk about making some better use of the Wyebot API, right? So Wyebot for a long time has had actually quite a rich REST API, and recently what we've been doing is a lot of work towards building an integration with probably the most popular visualization tool out there, which is Grafana, right? It's free, open source, all that good stuff. So a lot of people use it. And I'll talk about how their architecture works, what we're providing, and how to make that, how that'll make your life a little bit easier when you're wanting to integrate the data, and the resources as far as how we're gonna get there. So agenda. So I'll give a quick walkthrough of our API, kind of explain the nuts and bolts of it. We'll talk about the thing we developed, which is actually a Prometheus exporter. Okay, so it's going to be a tool to basically take the Wyebot API, convert it into metrics that Prometheus, which is the database for Grafana, will use. We'll walk through that tech stack in a little bit more detail, and then we'll try to spend as much time as we can on an actual live demo. So I'll hand it over to Adam at that point, and he'll walk through some real examples and show how this setup is going to work, right? So high-level introduction here of the API, right? So, at a high level, like, why would you want to use an API, right? The Wyebot dashboard's great. It's user-friendly. It does pretty much what you need to do. I guess what I would say, right, is when you want to automate things, an API, if you don't know, you probably do already, but the point is, you can make HTTP requests against an endpoint and get responses, in like JSON format. So basically what you're doing is you're taking the data from Wyebot, that we plot on our API, and then you can manipulate it and do other things with that data with external platforms, right? So, and it's really about additional customization. That's the biggest thing, and that's why we offer the API. So what are the advantages really when you think about this? So like I said, customizing, making dashboards that are a little bit more reorganized to your personal preference. Better or more customizable aggregation, I would say, right? Where you have maybe different subsets of sensors, different subsets of test results and things like that you want to plot together. Correlation with external tools, right? So, you take Wyebot's extremely rich data, and then maybe you compare it against, I don't know, maybe the Meraki API, right? And now maybe you'll see Meraki reports an AP going down. Wyebot reports, maybe higher latency with some test results, right? And that helps really paint a picture of the true root cause, using all these different systems that you already have, right? And then, of course, storing the historical data on your own system. There's benefits to that because you can store the data as long as you want, right? I mean, we do have a 30-day window on our cloud, which is sufficient for pretty much most use cases that we encounter. But of course, if you want to have it on your own system, feel free, right? You can store it for years if you really want to, assuming you have the storage for that. So the way we're going to be presenting this, to you folks, our customers, and our the people, doing proof of concepts for technology and things like that. We have knowledge-based articles which discuss where, step-by-step guides of how to actually install the Wyebot exporter. We're actually hosting this exporter on Docker Hub. Okay, so it's going to be a Docker image, which really that's the easiest way to get this thing up and running, right? Because Docker's nice, it's containerized, and you can just do a little Docker pull and start the container. And anyway, we have step-by-step guides for you here. So there's this first link. This is for our actual API documentation explaining all the API calls. The second link is the one you're going to want to look at if you're wanting to spin up this, what we're going to describe here today, the Prometheus Grafana integration. So this article has the step-by-step guide. It also has some sample Grafana templates. So some of the things that Adam will be showing later, you'll actually be able to see, be able to upload these to your own Grafana environment and get started with building some nice dashboards, with the Wyebot data. So let's talk about the Wyebot export a little bit more and explain, what it really is. Just for those that aren't super familiar with all the Grafana stuff and Prometheus stuff, an exporter might be an unfamiliar concept to you, right? So what it is really, though, it's a basically a script that we wrote that does API calls against the Wyebot API on effectively a schedule, and then it does some work to convert the data from our API into something that this Prometheus, we'll talk about what Prometheus is in a second, right? But it uses metrics. So we convert our API call into metrics with this exporter. And then Grafana is really, I don't want to say it's built around Prometheus, but Prometheus is probably one of the best integrations Grafana has. So a lot of the visualizations you can make are very friendly with Prometheus's query language. So that's what it is, right? It's basically a tool to take the Wyebot API, convert it into Prometheus metrics. Prometheus talks to Grafana. We'll show you a diagram of this in a little bit. And then, one thing I want to make sure is clear, right? This is going to be freely available for, those of you who have a Wyebot account, right? So if you have a Wyebot API key, that's really the only thing you need to bring to the table, and then you can get the exporter. It's on Docker Hub public, right? It's not we're not putting this behind a paywall or anything like that. So definitely feel free to experiment with this, right? That's what we would like to see. We'd like to see our customers actually, using this and letting us know how it's working for them. Now there will be some prerequisites. I just want to make this clear, right? When we think about, getting this up and running, there are some other systems that you want to have in place already, and we're not going to be providing the full stack as it were, and that's not preferable, right, for most of our customers anyway, because you might already have these things in your environment. So what I mean by that is you'll need to be hosting a Prometheus server instance. You'll need to be hosting Grafana already. You'll need a server that is actually running Docker, and you can run Docker in numerous ways, but the point is you just need something with Docker on it to get our exporter, and then of course you also need a Wyebot API key. Okay, so and again, this is all going to be explained more in that documentation that I think we've already linked here for you. So let's talk about the tech stack here. Prometheus is the database that we're going to be using here. So that is an open source, I guess you call it a time series database. And what it's doing is it's collecting metrics from, it can collect metrics from various things, right? So if you look at Prometheus online, there's lots of resources about this, but all sorts of tools and products have these Prometheus exporters you can get. And then basically it's sending data from, generally maybe an API or some other SNMP trap or whatever, into the Prometheus database. So great community around it, which is awesome. So effectively, this is what's going to be scraping the data from the Wyebot API, storing it, right? So this is where all your historical logs are going to be stored. So you're able to make some nice time series graphs on Grafana. Yeah, and by the way, Prometheus doesn't only work with Grafana. There's other, things that can consume the Prometheus database. So I just keep that in mind, I suppose, if you have another use case around, collecting some of the Wyebot API data. So Grafana, right? I think a lot of the people here are familiar, at least somewhat, with Grafana. But just explain what it is, right? So it's an open source visualization and analytics platform, meaning, it's got an extremely, again, another very rich community around this thing, and it lets you create really great visualizations, right? So you can do all sorts of different graphs. There's also alerting you can set up with this system. You can have different dashboards. I mean, there's a lot of nice functionality and customization, and again, resources online about how to really maximize Grafana usage. So just to be clear, right, Grafana is the tool to visualize the data. Prometheus is the tool to store the data, right? So these are the two things and how they kind of work together. And then Docker, okay, so Docker is, and by the way, you can run Prometheus and Grafana and our exporter in Docker. I'm sure many of you are probably going to be doing it in that way. But Docker is, containerization. So what that really means is, with a, say, a Linux box, if you want to install software, one of the things you run into sometimes is like dependencies and other things, and then maybe you install, things that sort of step on each other from a network perspective. So having a container means you really have like an isolated instance of that. It's basically like a mini OS inside of an OS, if you will, right? It's kind of like a VM, but it's not a full VM. So anyway, Docker, again, it's just a requirement for our exporter. And it's honestly, it's quite easy to use if you just look at some online resources and guides to set this up, right? So here's the diagram explaining how this is all going to work. So, of course, you start with your Wyebot deployment, right? So you have your Wyebot sensors across all your sites. They're collecting your data already, running all the sorts of tests and all sorts of, passive monitoring, which is, excellent. So, the more of these Wyebot sensors you have out there, the more visibility you're going to get into your environment, right? And then you have the Wyebot exporter. Okay, so you have the dashboard, which then is cloud-based. You have your API, right? So you have the exporter, which makes API calls, and then it converts, right, the Wyebot API into Prometheus metrics. Okay, and then Grafana talks to Prometheus, right? So that's how this is all sort of laid out. Hopefully it's fairly, straightforward. I know there's a few components here, but it's not the most difficult thing in the world to get going. And Adam will show it on the live demo. You can do this in just a few minutes if you follow our guides. So that's a good segue, right? Let's jump into the live demo. So Adam, I think, did you want to take over the screen share? Are you ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, let's do it. I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it over.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, so we're going to walk through really using our Wyebot exporter and setting it up in a Linux installation. Now, for the actual documentation, Jacob has been showing it, and we did link it in the chat there if anyone didn't see. But this is what the page looks like. So we have some instructions here, an introduction about what it's really about. We go through the prerequisites and give you links to the various documentation for how to get set up with those. And again, these are all very, very commonly used. You will find a plethora of resources out there for how to set up Docker on anything your heart wants. Same with Prometheus and Grafana. But then we actually get into the instructions of, well, setting us up with our solution. And the first thing we're going to need is an API key from a Wyebot dashboard. So I'm going to grab a Wyebot dashboard here. This is my own personal system that I have called a Grafana test for, well, today, right? I have a bunch of network tests set up here to kind of showcase what this will look like when you get things imported. But we need an API key. Where do we get that? If we go over to Management, API, well, I've already generated one here. But if I wanted a new one, I could just create one. We can create one for my user account here, generate, and now we have a new key. And I can show this. I'm going to expose my key here. Please don't use it in the interim of this meeting. You'll get my data. But this is what we'll be using with the actual exporter. Now, to flip back to the guide here, it then walks us through the actual install process. And as Jacob mentioned, we're hosting this on something called Docker Hub. Docker has Docker Hub, which is a great place to pull the containers from, basically a big public repository of all these different containers. There's ones for Prometheus itself, there's ones for Grafana, and then we now have our Wyebot Exporter Prometheus container. And actually on this page itself, we do go through a lot of the instructions that you'll need to get started. It's documented in a couple different places. Now, what I have set up for this demo, this kind of live walkthrough here, I have two different Linux servers running, both running Debian. Just for full information. One is hosting Grafana and Prometheus. The other is ready to go with Docker installed. If I actually look here, I'm going to quickly do an ls to show you the file structure I'm dealing with. I have a Docker Compose file and a Prometheus configuration. In my Docker Compose file, if I cap this guy out, it is pretty much the standard setup for Grafana and Prometheus. I wanted to just show this to say you don't need to do anything fancy to get this working. This is like as standard as it gets for a setup. The one modification I did do here was to add in specifically this. I wanted to have my data longer than 30 days, so I've set the retention here to 365 days. And so this is ready to go. And I could actually pull up the Grafana server. Here we're in it. And there is really nothing with this so far. It is a brand new setup right after install. Same with the Prometheus server. Now, these both have their own web pages, which is really nice. It's part of why I like these sort of tools. We can go and monitor and look at the data that they're pulling and do some troubleshooting through this if need be. Now, I wanted to really just explain that I have this running, so it is not going to be part of my walkthrough for today. I will walk you through how to get our Wyebot exporter data into all of this and import some of those custom dashboards. Now, how do we get started with the exporter? Well, if we go back to our docs here, there's really two methods for Docker. You could either use Docker run directly, which is a command that you run, and it's going to start the container. This is all you would need to do outside of making sure your cloud name is set correct and your API key. Now, what's the cloud name? I've talked about the API key and where to get that. What on earth is this? We, of course, call it out up here, but really when you're logged into your Wyebot dashboard, you will have a particular URL, a website that you're on. For my personal system, I'm on cloud.wyebot.com, so I'll leave it there. We have some other ones. If you're in the EU, we have an EU specific one, and there's kind of a plethora of them out there. So make sure you check this when you're logged into your dashboard, and you want to take this first bit, the actual subdomain, and give that to the exporter config. So I can just copy and paste this. Why don't we go ahead and do that? I'm going to copy this. We're going to head to my exporter example where, again, I do have Docker running. So I can do like sudo docker here, ps to show, let me type in my password, that there are going to be no containers running on this quite yet. Helps probably if I type my password correctly. So there you go. There's nothing on this server quite yet. I'm going to paste in what I just copied from this page here. Make sure I actually have it copied. There we go. But again, I do need to update both the cloud name and API key. Cloud name, I'm already good to go. I have that set correctly. And so we'll update the API key here. I'm going to backspace, head back to my dashboard, and we'll actually copy him this time. And I'll hide it just for due diligence. Now I'm going to paste in here, and I should be able to just press enter. I knew this was going to happen. I walked through this prior to, of course, doing this live demo, and I made the exact same mistake. And I will tell you, I make this mistake every time I'm using Docker. Sudo is just admin on Linux, and so I need to have admin permissions to run this. Boom, there we go. It tells me here it's unable to find the image locally, so it's downloading it from Docker Hub. There's nothing I really need to do for it. I just told it, hey, I want this image, and we're actually up and running. Now I could verify this. My server here, I could show you, it's on a particular local IP address, this 10.117. So if we actually go to that website, or that, I guess, IP address with a particular port, this is called out as part of the documentation here. Let me scroll down a little bit. So we link down here to local host. If you were to host it on your own laptop, right? You can run Docker on Windows, you could host on your own laptop, you would be going to local host. Since I'm doing on an external server, I'm using the IP address of that server with that same port. And so if we go back to that tab now, you'll see a ton of information. Now I'm actually going to refresh and just show you something here. This isn't important to know. Really, the way this works is when you poke the page, when Prometheus pokes the page, it's then going to run the scrape. And depending on the size of your account, that might take a little bit of time. Not an excess amount of time, of course. It should typically be well under a minute, but just be a little bit patient. You might see this hang for 15 seconds, 30 seconds while you're waiting for the data to populate. But this is what it looks like, as crazy as this is. This is what Prometheus is looking for to extract and store in the database. But we're now running the Wyebot exporter script, but Prometheus doesn't right now know where to find this. It doesn't know about the Wyebot script that we just stood up. And again, if we go back to the documentation, this is called out right here. You need to tell Prometheus, as part of the Prometheus configuration, where to find your Wyebot exporter. The example that we give here is assuming that you're going to run it all on one server. That's a really common way to do it. Actually, if I were to go back to this Grafana demo system, I could edit this Docker Compose and just paste in right below this stuff the Wyebot information as well to have it all on one machine. Different use cases for different folks. There's a lot of reasons to do it in different ways. I'm not going to go into all those reasons here. I just wanted to make sure to explain our documentation is assuming you're going to run it on the local same Docker instance. In this case, I'm going to run it externally. So let's go ahead and update my Prometheus config. Now, if you've never done Prometheus stuff before, you might not have any idea what the configuration is like. Again, there's going to be a lot of examples online of it. What I will show you here is my Prometheus is completely blank right now. I don't have any configuration in here. So I'm really just going to paste in what we provide in the documentation. But as I mentioned, I need to update this portion. I need to tell it where to find my exporter. So I'm going to remove this and type in the IP we're looking for here. 168. Sorry, oh no, I am not a Vi guy. I wanted to do Vi because I figure, you know, it's the proper one to use on Linux. Let's go ahead and just do it the noob way. No one make fun of me here. Nano. I'll paste in. I'm so bad at using Vi. And now we'll type in the actual IP. 192.168.10.117, I think. Yeah, 117. Save. Done. Now I need to restart my containers here. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Docker compose down and a Docker compose up to just restart Prometheus. Boom. Now you'll see the way I ran this, we're getting the logs right in console here. What I prefer to do, I'm going to Control C to stop this. I like to append -D. That tells it to run detached. It's going to run in the background, so it doesn't, you know, take my console. I still have stuff I can do on here. And that's really where we would use Docker Compose down to stop it, etc. Try not to get too much into the weeds of Docker stuff, but I want to make sure to clarify specifically the commands I'm running here. And we do, as part of our documentation, have the -D in there because that's usually how you're going to want to run things. So we should be good to go. Let's go check Prometheus. So I have here Prometheus running on port 9090. If I go to the status on target health, we should see, beautiful. It's pointed at the correct IP address. We can see it's looking for a /metrics page, and it hasn't quite run this scan yet. Now, we set up the Prometheus exporter to run every 5 minutes or scrape every 5 minutes. If we go back and look at this configuration, that is defined right here. Scrape interval, 5 minutes. Why did we choose that number? You could obviously run it more often if you wanted to, but there isn't really much of a reason. The sensors have their passive data is updated typically every 5 minutes, and then the network tests can run on 10-minute intervals. So to get all of the data exposed by the API running on an interval of every 5 minutes is perfect. I'm really saying this, you know, it's going to take a little bit of time. It might take it 5 minutes here to actually go through and finally do that scrape. So while we're waiting, I want to start to walk you through a little bit of what Grafana looks like, what this stuff looks like when we get into Grafana, and some of the, what I think is coolness involved. If any of you have been on calls with me in the past, you will probably be familiar with the phrase of, I can talk about this stuff for hours. And that goes doubly so for Grafana. So I'm going to try to temper myself here and not go way into the weeds. But I find this stuff fascinating because really when we get into analyzing the environment, finding problems, resolving those problems, seeing the trend, not only from the sensors, but correlating with other tools and correlating between the sensors helps immensely in finding the actual root cause. Now, I have a public examples directory here on my Grafana server, just to show you a few of the examples that we have listed on the documentation page. Apologies for continuing to reference this, but I think it's really important that I do drive home the point that everything you need should be in this document here. We tried to write it in a way to make it really easy to follow and work through. And we have 3 different examples here: sensor overview, network test, and this third one that I don't actually have imported right now. Let's start by looking at the sensor overview. Now, my goal with this page was to effectively remake what you typically see on the Wyebot dashboard, but in Grafana, partly to show off what Grafana can do, but also to give some additional flair to it. Number one, I think it looks pretty, right? We have a lot of cool data here, and more importantly, we have more than one sensor shown on a single page like this. So I could quickly go and find the particular sensor I want to look at. And when I said add more flair, well, I want to scroll down a little bit. So we have the sensor status here showing online, offline for the sensors. We have the quantity of issues with their severity level, access points, all this different stuff that you're probably familiar with if you use the Wyebot dashboard. But there's a new tile. These. The SSID power level. This is looking at the 2.4 on this left side and the 5 gigahertz on the right side. I think it's just a really interesting way to not only see what our APs are currently doing, but their shift over time as they're jumping up and down for power level, as you have a hotspot turn on or off. And by filtering up top, I know it's a little bit small, but you can see I have location, sensor, SSID. Well, we could use this to show maybe one SSID at a time. So instead of showing every AP in existence, let's go ahead and filter this for, I don't know, maybe Meraki Enterprise if we can find them in here. Now, this is a big list. This is showing every SSID the sensors detect, and you might want to show other networks like these Verizon hotspots. But I said I want Meraki, so I'm going to start typing, and we're going to find Meraki Enterprise here. I'll check that, and what you'll see is the graph should update. Beautiful. And especially like these here, you know, the passive tiles, a lot of these are going to stay the same for this particular page. They're not going to change based on the SSID, but these definitely do. I have it show the SSID here, and then it's updating this list to only show those few APs. Really cool view. But this is kind of my initial example. And really, where I start to like this stuff is not just this example, but if we go back and look at the network tests example, you can get some beautiful aggregate information between your sensors. I've definitely talked to customers in the past who've asked for like a way to show, you know, between all of my sensors, all of the network tests they're running, what's our most common failure reason? What's going on with our environment that's causing these issues? Well, here we can see. This is showing all network tests, and my selection right now is set for every single location. And this is pulling from our demo system and my own personal system, so we can actually go through. I could grab my Grafana test system here and show just that particular network. Or I could grab maybe our Wyebot Knowledge Park system. Or we could go make fun of Jacob's network, but I won't do that for today. So you have the ability to filter and start to pinpoint. You know, if you need to look at a particular thing, you can start to do that. Maybe the question comes up, people have been complaining about Wi-Fi issues on your guest network. Well, we could grab this SSID selection here and pull up specifically the guest network, or like we have our Wyebot guest, or maybe Wyebot TLS network, and show the performance there. Beautiful. I love this sort of view. Now, historically, you can also adjust this in Grafana. Right now, I have this set up to show the last 12 hours. In the top right here, you can see that. Well, I can take this further. I could go to the last 7 days, for example, and we're going to see, ooh, there's some intermittent failures in here. And we show those failure modes on the right. But what if you need to drill into a particular network test? Really, these examples, I set them up for two reasons. First off, to showcase what this stuff looks like, but also to give you some tiles, some panels, as Grafana calls it, to work with, so you can see how you might use the data from the exporter. And if I scroll down here a little bit, so this top portion is all of the network test results. And then I go into something called sensor connections, basically the actual connection attempts the sensors are making. And I have some additional metrics I break out here. The total connections, the connection report, which technically could have some different error messages than the network tests. And then the association time, EAP time, DHCP time, DNS. But this is getting to be a lot of information, right? We have a lot of different things stacked up here. Think of these example pages as exactly that, examples to get started and see the sort of data that you can pull out of this. But I really recommend that you just take some time and set these up for your environment. You know, maybe for this particular page, I want to show these two sensors only because I want to have a report for the corporate staff in that building. Well, I can set it up for exactly that. And you'll see these tiles get a lot more readable, as it were. And the whole idea behind this is the ability to customize. Maybe you don't like the colors. Maybe you don't like the way I have these labels listed. All of that is adjustable, which we'll get into in a little bit here. I want to scroll down a little bit more. So this network test page has the connection metrics. It has a metric for each network test and actually multiple metrics for a lot of the network tests. So if I expand the voice section here, oh, we need to probably grab some sensors that are running a voice test. Let me go ahead and set this up. Going just back to all so I can show you data points. And so here we have the voice tests and voice, video, application test. Every network test in here has metrics that you can look at, but what metrics are available? What could we potentially show? There's a page for it. Let me go back to the documentation. So underneath these sample Grafana templates, we have these available metrics. If I click into this article here, you will see the definition of every single metric that is available through the current exporter. So like there's some general ones from just Prometheus itself. And then we start to have the actual custom ones that we made. So sensor status, sensor issues, the access points, and these are grouped to be fairly logical as you're working through this. And let's say that, maybe you need to show the DHCP response time for a particular building, and you maybe want to group that in a particular way. Well, here we can get the Wyebot connections DHCP time, and these labels are effectively your way to group it. We'll get into this a little bit further, but I wanted to show this up front to say there's some really good documentation to see what is available, what you could potentially use, and this is something that you could expand on. If you want, we definitely can send you some of the source code, though that is, I'm going to say, very advanced. If you need to do a custom solution, feel free to reach out to us in support. I can supply the source code to you. We don't want to just make it publicly available because in 99% of cases, you're probably not going to need it. That would only be if you wanted to pull metrics that I didn't add in here and wanted to see how we develop the metrics. Now, I want to walk you through the process of actually making a custom tile and doing some custom aggregation. But to really just round out what we've been talking about so far, the whole idea here is you're able to customize, show these different views for what you need to show, and you can go crazy with it. I wanted to show these initial ones just to kind of walk you through what they're for, but let's go find my SSID inspector. There we go. I think this is really cool. So what we can do here is we can filter for particular SSIDs, and these top ones are the same ones that we had on that sensor overview page. But then I have these additional tiles showing the amount of BSSIDs or AP radios per channel. Really clean way to see the congestion in that area. More complex views for sure, but if you need them, they're here. And you can do even more crazy stuff. Just a quick sneak peek. This is stuff that I don't make available because it is a little bit messy and not super ready for public viewing. But the ability to potentially show like the congestion on every single channel and start to get a feel for the environment. Beautiful. I'm a data guy. I love this stuff. Now, let's walk through an example of actually creating a quick tile. So we have our data, we have our metrics. How do we make a new dashboard? Well, I could go into Grafana here and I can click new dashboard. Great. And I can add a visualization. I'm going to grab the Prometheus stable exporter here. It's just one that I've been using. And we have a metric selection area. Now, I'm not going to walk you through this in detail because, frankly, I am not an expert in Grafana. I learned how to use Grafana for this project and really got familiar with it as part of developing it. It's not that bad. I promise you it's going to feel pretty intimidating off the bat if you've never used Grafana before, but the resources out there make it very digestible and easy to get working with. So let's say, for example, I needed to show the response time of all the different websites that I'm loading from my sensors. I have my sensors deployed in different buildings, set up to load particular websites. Well, we have the Wyebot test application time here that I could grab. If I click this and click the Run Query button, you're going to see some data coming back. Ooh, metrics. Great. Now, this is where we can start to filter, and it is pretty important to filter in many cases. Like I might want to filter for the location of Wyebot Knowledge Park, and I could do that, and it's going to move this list to be a lot smaller. We only have those particular sensors showing up, but maybe I want to be even more specific about this. I don't care about all application tests. I care about specifically, we'll say sites.google.com. Well, I could add another label. You can have as many labels as you really want in here that are available. I could grab a URL, and we could grab the sites.google.com, as I mentioned, and run the query. And it's going to update this to have just those results. So hopefully it's starting to become clear what I really mean by the customization in here. But maybe instead of showing the one URL, I want to show an aggregate, but I want to show an aggregate for a particular SSID. So let's grab SSID. We'll grab our Meraki Enterprise Network, and I can run this. But we have individual data points for all these different websites. You can do something really cool in here. With operations, I can start to aggregate these, and I could average. This is showing us the actual millisecond response time. I can average the millisecond response time between these and show for each sensor connecting, what's that look like? So here's what we would do. I would average by maybe the URL could work if I wanted to have an average for each URL. I could average per sensor name if I wanted to show it from each sensor. I could average per AP or BSSID. You can go crazy with this stuff, but for this example, why don't we go ahead and average per SSID? Run this, and you're going to see there's only one metric now, which makes sense, right? We were looking to average all those metrics together into one big metric here, showing the average response time. Now, to pretty this up, if you have never done Grafana stuff, it's important to know about the panel on the right. This is where all your fun stuff lives for customization. So I could actually click this button up top here to change the graph type. I could go to a pie chart. I could do a gauge, or for this particular data point, I think it makes sense to leave it as a time series graph. We could name it here, application response time. Great. Maybe I want to change the color. So I can scroll down in here, and you better believe there's options for that. Classic palette, we could do like a single color. And we'll go with like a nice blue for Wyebot. But I want coloring under it. You don't need to remember all these options that I'm going through. I just wanted to show that there's a lot of fun options to play with for what you need these graphs to look like. And I would really recommend, if you have never used Grafana before, look through my examples. You can edit any of those panels in there and see how we've set them up, because one of the important things that I do, if I were to remove this average function that gives us that nice label, you'll see it looks like a mess for these labels. Well, I can customize that. I can change the legend down here to be, maybe specifically the host name is what I want to show in that label. And so it updates to be all the host name for those different URLs. A lot to play with, a lot to learn. One tip I do want to give you before we go back to the actual setup process here that we started at the beginning is, because you are going to be querying typically every 5 minutes, or for network tests, every 10 minutes is the most often they can run, you may want to adjust the minimum interval to 10 minutes, for example. This is not critical by any means, but what will happen, Grafana interpolates the data points. And so technically, if I set this to like 15 seconds, we don't have a network test result every 15 seconds, but Grafana is interpolating. It's assuming there was probably a network test there based on the data that it had. That's okay. Personal preference on it, but really my note is if you switch this down to 10 minutes, That's going to reduce the amount of dots that you see if you did like 20 minutes. I mean, setting it up for your test interval would work. What I've done for pretty much all of them is just set the minimum to 10 minutes for the network tests, and then I did 5 minutes for the passive tiles just because of the update difference there. Now, let's head back to the actual install example because we should have some data at this point. I think we've given it enough time. Recall that we set up the exporter on a server here. I just ran the Docker script. It's good to go, should be running. We verified that we had the data here when we went to the website, so we're good to go on that front. You really don't need to do all this verification. It should just kind of work for you. But we can also go back to Prometheus now. And recall that last time we saw it, we were still waiting for it to do a scrape. Well, if I refresh this target health page, we should see a happy little dot there. Up. Great. Last scrape was 33 seconds ago. So that means now if I go to Grafana, we can get the data in. To be clear, if you really wanted to, you can graph stuff in Prometheus, but honestly, Grafana is just prettier, so I usually graph in Grafana. Now, how do we tell Grafana to find Prometheus? It's really, really easy. As Jacob was saying, they make it great to use with Prometheus. You just come to connections, data sources, boom, Prometheus. Great. And since it's on my Docker container, I just do Prometheus as the actual IP address. I don't need to have a specific IP. And that is actually it. Save and test. I'm done. Grafana is now talking to Prometheus. I don't need to do anything else. I can now just go and set up dashboards. Now, I could go through and make a bunch of dashboards from scratch here, but let's continue with the example of really setting this up from how we recommend doing it. I'm going to grab the templates here. So I'm going to click each of these links. You'll see them download in my browser here. Oh, I need to, I guess, fix this one. I will do that a moment after this. I stop sharing. But what I'm going to do is actually upload these to my Grafana server. So if I go to that new dashboard I'm making here, and I click New, I can import. I can upload that JSON file. So we'll start with the network test one. And we're pretty much good to go, but we do need to tell where to find our stuff. So I'll select the actual Prometheus data source in here. You could have a ton of Prometheus data sources if you wanted to go crazy with it, but boom, we have our data. Now it is set to 90 days right now. I could flip this over to 15 minutes and we'll see some updated data points. And that is one of the other things, right? So Grafana is going to be talking to Prometheus to pull data out. Prometheus is talking to the export, and the export is talking to the API. There is going to be a little bit of a delay on that, not a crazy delay, but you may need to wait 5-10 minutes before you actually see the data points in here. Or let's say that you have a network test that's running every 4 hours. Well, that network test data won't be there until the test runs, right? If you start your scrape, it is going to grab the data points from the last 9 minutes is how I have that set up. So it's basically grabbing the current results from the dashboard. And yeah, we're good to go. Really, I don't have to do anything else. This is up and running. We can actually go back and import the other one. So I could do the same import here and boom, we grab the sensor overview, select the data source again, import, great. And we have our stuff. So that's kind of the basics of using the exporter. It should be pretty plug and play to get set up with. Now, a note I will throw out here, we've done some pretty extensive testing on our own systems and some different accounts that we've had access to through the customer approval just to make sure it's working. But that is not to say you're not going to run into bugs. If you do see like skips in data that don't make sense, if you're running into something weird that just doesn't align with what you expect, please feel free to shoot us an email and support. We can dive into it. This is going to be a little bit less active support, though, than the normal sensor side. The sensor side, we have a full team managing that. We can assist you with it really, really quickly, of course. I don't think any of you have probably gotten a response that took longer than a day. But for the Prometheus exporter, it's going to have to go to the dev team. It's going to take a little bit longer. So if you do run into problems, it's probably going to be a little bit of a back and forth for us to get it figured out. But think of this as a community project, something that you can use to get started with the API. And I will say, I definitely am not pulling all of the data out of the solution. If you want to take this further, you absolutely can. Like, I'm not parsing the issue detail section to grab the individual retransmission from clients, but theoretically you could. So that's effectively it for my overview, the live demo here. Please reach out if you do end up with questions. Just to kind of re-clarify the point, though, what we can't help with is setting up your Docker install for you, setting up your Grafana server, your Prometheus server. We are here to support the Wyebot exporter container image. We can't help you through a whole Linux installation, Windows installation. It's just got to draw a line somewhere for support. But that's, yeah, I think everything I wanted to go through. We're going to have a quick survey here, a 30-second survey, if you are willing to fill it out, just to let us know how we could do better, how we can improve in the future. We'd very much appreciate that. And now I will go ahead and flip it back over to the slides for some Q&A.
Nice. Well, thanks, Adam. There will be a quiz afterwards. So just kidding.
Yeah. Do you think I went too deep into the technical side? I have such a hard time keeping myself in check.
I think it's good. I mean, you know, this is new to many people. Many people probably already know some of this. So I mean, I guess what I'll say is, you know, well, a lot of this did look very involved and in depth. You know, if you get in there and have some time to play around with it, you'll find the level of depth you want to get into. I mean, it's the nice thing about this is it's extremely flexible and customizable. So we just wanted to give, you know, our beloved customers more options, right? I mean, that's the main thing here. So yeah. So I think once the survey's done, yeah, any questions we have, I saw we had one come in. I'm not exactly sure how to answer. So it said, you know, can the sensors be exposed natively in the Wyebot dashboard? I'm not totally sure what that means. I think if you were referring to the Prometheus metrics we talked about, you know, you will need to use the exporter that we had discussed today. But I mean, the Wyebot UI does have pretty much, you know, all these features. It's just about visualizing it in different ways with the Grafana option. So I'll continue to sort of wait around for more questions to come in. But yeah.
Yeah, we're pretty much through all the content now. Yeah, if there's any questions, throw them in the Q&A section. We'll go ahead and answer them here for the next little bit. But yeah, I hope you guys have fun with the exporter. Please let us know if you run into any issues. I'm going on vacation this weekend, so no issues this weekend. Just kidding.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Mike, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to tee up here. Or Adam, maybe show those links again one more time just so people.
Sure. Yeah,
know.
absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. And yeah, to answer your question, about the sensor hardware needing to purchase separately. No, the Wyebot licensing model is all in one. So, you know, the software subscription and the sensors are included. But definitely, you know, check with our, you know, if you're already working with our sales team, great. Otherwise, reach out. We're happy to show you guys a, you know, a demo and even do a proof of concept if that's something you want to proceed with.
And links wise, so you really are going to have two main things. You have, of course, the overall API documentation, but then the main one's going to be here, the Prometheus Grafana. So if you're just on the support site, you can search for Prometheus. It'll come up in the search bar. And then there's the Docker Hub link as well, which also just on Docker, you can search for Wyebot and it will come up. Both are going to have documentation related to them. A lot of good information will be in here for you. Great. Okay. Well, I guess there's no more questions. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. I hope you enjoyed.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks all. Have a good rest of the day. We'll see you.